welcome to this, the second installment of the Lubbock Liberty Workshop series. The object of this series, it's a monthly town hall style informational workshop series where each month we're going to pick a topic, delve in, have a presentation, and that presentation is going to be followed by questions and answers from the members of the audience, the participants, and where the object is just to facilitate an open discussion and debate. So this morning we're going to be talking about something very important, and that's local economic issues. And I'm going to have the distinct honor of introducing a patriot, a long-standing taxpayer advocate who's been monitoring City Hall for over 20 years. She's dedicated a lifetime to taxpayer advocacy, and she needs a little more introduction than that. So, it is my honor to introduce Mikel Ward. Mikel's going to give a presentation on the local issues that we're facing. And if you would, hold your questions to the end. That way we can be sure and give Mikel enough time to get through everything we need to touch on. So, without further ado, Mikel Ward.
Where is the mic?
Used to that.
You ran away?
Ran away.
This isn't a good start. I think I'll clip it to me in case I decide to go wandering around. Sounds good, thank you. Put my stuff up here. Good morning. I'm always talking about all these issues, but it seemed to sort of up the ante when Alan decided to have it filmed. It made me have to sit down and actually organize my thoughts. And a lot of my friends are my best critics as well, because they know my tendency to wander off into old ancient history stories and things. But I wanted to start this morning. Whoops. The other day I got my I call them my nannies. It's the Medicare Advantage plan that we're on, and every time we get a letter, we're scared to death that it says, you're no longer in our group, go away and never come back. But they were talking about how we were going to have a lot of serious issues to deal with, and so to help us get a grip on things, they have enclosed a Coventry jar opener for our use. So I think we all need some rubber jar grips these days, whether it's federal or local or all of the above. And over the years, I found that I worked for many, many years in the grassroots area, but more on the federal level on things. And it seemed like, well, my parents were, for those of you that are in the Republican group here, my parents were one of the first Republicans in a tiny little group that would fit in a phone booth back in the late 40s. But my mother's granddaddy was, and I've told everybody this story, so bear with me for those of you who hear me all the time. My mother's dad was a rabid socialist and was Eugene V. Debs' right-hand man and traveled all over the world, helped go over and foment the Russian Revolution and a lot of other crazy things. So early on, I think I was just immersed in understanding the folly of socialism and the beauty of individual freedom and free enterprise. So many people lately who have come into our midst have suddenly had, I think, what I'd call a V8 moment when they finally got their LP&L July bills. Suddenly it was like, what in the heck is going on in this town? And I intended to bring it with me, but there was a really cute Better Half cartoon last Sunday that expresses it pretty well. Stanley says, I'm afraid to open this bill because it comes with CPR instructions. And I just thought that was too rich and not to use. But anyway, I'm always interested in looking back at history, and sometimes people say, don't go back into your old stories. But everything that's happening currently has some root in the past. So one of my favorite quotes is actually on the book of a planning book that Randy Henson put together of all of the city planning, not the outside consultant planning, but the city planning since 1943. And it's a quote from Churchill, that the farther back you can look, the farther forward you're likely to see, which I think is a good thing to remember. And also, if you want to go really far back, Cicero in 55 BC in Rome said the budget should be balanced, the treasury should be refilled, the debt should be reduced, and the arrogance of officialdom should be controlled. Went on to say some other things, but doesn't that sound pretty current? So everything old is new again sometimes, and there's no limit to what government will do to us. But our founding fathers made very clear that our form of government requires an involved, informed electorate. It doesn't work unless we are. And I guess I learned that lesson also pretty early. Because if we're not paying attention, what I've called over the years concentrated interest, where it's their very being and their livelihood, will overrule those of us who have lots of diversified interest and are not just concentrated day and night on how to rake more money out of the taxpayers' pockets. So I think that's an important thing to think. But I began to see that the federal issues were very often mirrored at the local level. Probably about 25 years ago, I began to realize as a grassroots activist that I wasn't having much impact. It was like a drop in the ocean when I would do all this, and I don't suggest that we quit doing that, but that there was a lot of things that looked very similar happening locally, and often they were being backed by the important good old boy group here who, as a child, I knew they met at the Hemphill Wells Tea Room and basically planned all of the what was going to happen next, who was going to be on the council next. And some of their sons are not quite as dedicated to doing it with private money. I confronted one of them once and told him that the difference back then when he was part of the Kingmakers was that when they wanted to do some big project, they put their own money into it instead of coming to us and trying to figure out some way to wrench it out of us before we even realized it. So that tends to be what happens. Also on the local level, I have found that I can build great coalitions across party lines with a lot of Democrats who are very suspicious of local government because it is run by these people. I'll name them, not individually, but I'll tell you my nickname for them in a minute. But anyway, but I found that they were my allies on a lot of local issues, but they disagreed with me on state and federal issues. So over the years, I've challenged a lot of folks that on the local level, because Republicans mostly have controlled it, not to begin with. I think about 1980 was when it began to turn around. In fact, I was the volunteer coordinator that year for Ronald Reagan. And I thought, damn, I'm good. People are just pouring in here wanting to help. Am I not a good recruiter? It turned out it wasn't me at all, of course. But it did turn the tide somewhat in Lubbock. And prior to that, a lot of the local Democrats were very much like the grassroots Republicans are now in a lot of ways. It was just a difference in name, but they hadn't veered so far to the left on the federal level. But I think all those things are very important. I'm always going back to quotes again because there's lots of good things. Even Ronald Reagan used this one at one point from James Madison. He says, "I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments by those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. So it's kind of a creep, if you will. And we're often accused of being right-wing extremists, and if everything doesn't fall off on the floor, I'll go over and draw you a picture. Actually, on the scheme of things, with the, oops, I don't know where that's going to write. There we go. This being total ruler law is what I call it. I've done programs before on more constitutional aspects of things. But basically, totalitarianism. And on the other end is anarchy. So a constitutional people's law, which is what most of us believe in, is here in the middle. And this one, all of the power is from the top down, with the poor little people being down here. And over here is just nothing. I mean, it's chaos. And a lot of what my grandfather was actually working on was to destroy the whole capitalist system into anarchy. And he said the only way that they could do it was to destroy faith and freedom and families. And if that happens, then dependency comes to the government. And they thought, like all of these current folks that think that same way, particularly in Washington, and some here, quite frankly, that they were the only ones that were smart enough to decide how to basically redistribute it all where it would be fair. So in this case, in the center, which is what we believe in, I hope, most of us, is the people's law, which is the foundation of it. We are supposed to be in control, and this is supposed to be the rulers. So, and it starts with, in all of these cases, national, state, community, family, and then the individual. So when it gets upside down, things don't work very well. And I won't go through it in a lot of detail, but just think through what we're dealing with at all levels right now. On this side, it's established by force and conquest. Not quite, but there's a lot of threatening things being said these days. The people are not equal. They're divided into classes. All the property is owned by the ruler. And if you don't think that, miss paying your property taxes, and you don't own your property, you're just paying rent on it. And I'll get into that a little later too. We have no unalienable rights under this system. Decisions are at the whims of men rather than by the rule of law. And that problems are solved by issuing more edicts and tighter control of people, resulting in extreme human misery, which is unavoidable. Freedom never looked on as a solution, and they claim the right to rule to discourage any kind of uprising. And I think that's very important. In this, where at least I thoroughly believe we need to be, but it takes a lot of effort to keep this kind of system going. And that's where the power to govern is in the individual people and their private property rights, all sorts of things. Set up a covenant society by mutual consent. Laws and officials require consent of the governed. Government's only purpose is to protect the unalienable rights of everybody. No power is delegated to government unless it's natural and lawful to do so individually. And I'll quote from Frederick Bastiat in a minute. But equal protection of rights is not equal distribution. It's more of an opportunity, not security. We're never assured about any of this. And it's the duty of the citizens to participate, to function, and not concentrate the power in those rulers. And that's kind of part of my other talks I've done. But I think it's important because even on the local level, it's not that extreme, but it is a problem. And I think I'll go ahead and go in. This is a neat little book if you've not seen it or read it. I particularly quote all the time, and I've even done it several times to our city councils over the last 20-something years. And it's basically a test. It's on like page 21, I think. That, and I won't quote it. I'm not going to read you this whole little book, but it's talking about legal plunder, which we're seeing a lot of here. How is this legal plunder to be identified? Quite simply, see if the law takes from some persons what belongs to them and gives it to other persons to whom it does not belong. See if the law benefits one citizen at the expense of another by doing what the citizen himself cannot do without committing a crime. For instance, this was written in 1850 by a very smart, libertarian-leaning person. But in effect, we can go out and hire firemen and policemen individually to protect our house if we don't want to guard it day and night. But we can't go out and say that it's just not equitable. My neighbor down here has 3 cars and only 2 people, and I can't go hotwire one of his cars and go give it to somebody else on my block that needs a car. But through the force of government, these types of things happen, and we think about it as being transferred to poor people. But in effect, we're becoming more and more at the bottom of the food chain, if you will, and a lot of what's being transferred is going into some pretty wealthy folks here. And I don't play class warfare, but this has been a systematic thing, and that's sort of the premise for what I wanted to talk about today. By the way, if I'm saying anything that you really need clarified, I just didn't want to have a lot of long speeches made in the middle because there is a lot to cover. When they said, come talk about everything you know about local government, and I thought, how many days do we have, or is this a series? But basically, when I began to watch city government, the budget was about that thick, and I've got all of the data. I was going to try not to get into lots of mind-numbing facts and figures, which I can do pretty easily. I carry them around with me even in case anybody wants me to document it. I could live in a house about half the size I do if I didn't have to keep everything to keep from being sued for libel in some cases. But anyway, it has far outgrown the population growth in the last 20 years and has become so much more complex. Now you can't get a hard copy of the budget. It would cost them $100 to make you a copy because it's in 2 volumes that sit about this tall. Used to, it was in a little bitty book about this thick. And what we found was that total revenue has tripled and quadrupled, and the debt has escalated tremendously along that. A lot of our current debt, if some of you picked up the little flyer, I think I even kept one in here, you need to mark through the 113 million because the new debt service for 2013-14 is 127 instead of 113. So rather than reprinting these, I think it's more effective to just show how much it's changed even in 1 year. That's not to say that a lot of the debt is not warranted. It was just the fact that it was put on all at one time. I didn't bring the comparisons, but from 07, it's in here somewhere, the debt was about 445 little plus million for principal. This year, it's 2.5 times that much in 6 years. So, but the vast majority of it is backed by revenue bonds, which are supported by our utility bills. There's water and Cremois, both in water. The water alone is 330 million. The Cremois added to it's another 63 million. Wastewater has 160 million principal debt. Solid waste about almost 17 million. On and on. LP&L has a considerable 120 something million. And what's interesting, and it goes on through, there's Gateway, which I'll talk about in a minute. All of these have a revenue stream of their own, and there's some TIFs in here, which I'll also get into and explain in a minute. But in effect, only probably less than 130 million of the $1.1 billion principal, which they did pay it down slightly, but they've upped the interest or the payment. And this is out of all the funds, by the way. But in effect, the only property tax supported debt or general obligation bonds are around 130 million. So we haven't really voted ourselves that much debt, but all of these essential things, of course the other parts of some of these, they, in my opinion, have misused or really aren't following the letter of the state law governing certificates of obligation. And for many years, they have gone in and just said, we can't. These were meant to be for emergencies, like when a sewer line broke and you had to do something right then. I mean, something real major would happen. And it has been used more and more for things that they just don't think the citizens might approve in a bond election. And so they've done through kind of smoke and mirrors a lot of things over the last few years. And it's becoming more and more difficult to curtail what our utility bills are because of the debt that's built up on them. And I didn't want to just get bogged down today in LP&L. There's a lot of things we're all working on those issues as well. But basically, I'll throw another picture up here. Let's see. Everybody's figured out which side we want to be on here. The city has, and I'm not going to get bogged down in numbers. Those things can be found in budgets and so forth. But there are different funding sources. Property tax, of course. I don't think that one's going to work. How about green, since it's about money? Property tax is one source, which we all know about. I can spell it. Interesting little side note on that, in case you're ever wanting to fight your appraisal creep. The reason for appraisal creep, which generates more money each year than the year before, I found out sort of inadvertently, they include the realtor's commission. Every time a house sells in your neighborhood, they won't consider it down at the LCAD unless it has sold through a realtor. That tacks on about 6% average on your value of your home. And I have screamed, and if anybody mentions it, Dave Kimbrough knows it, that I include people in on it because it's another dirty little secret that's not required to be that way. But I found out because I was trying to use as one of my comparables a private sale. And they said, oh, we can't consider that. But in effect, every time a house sells, so cringe when you see a for sale sign or a sold sign in your neighborhood, because when that sells, they add that value that does not benefit the buyer nor the seller, but is added to the valuation of all of the surrounding property, as though it did. And so that's part of the appraisal creep that causes this to increase all the time, so that elected officials can pat themselves on the back and say, see, I didn't raise your taxes. But they have, in effect. And so that's why the numbers are very important on the effective tax rate numbers, which are in here as well. But I won't get into that. The other part is a sales tax. And all these things don't sound very much. Property tax right now on the city side is each penny. Can everybody see the green? I can go to something darker. Okay. Is generating this year about 1.23, almost 1.25 cents. I mean, a million, I'm sorry, for each penny. It equals about $1.25 million. So that's how you figure out a lot of these parts and pieces. On the other side is sales tax, which, as we all know, is 8.25. But Texas, the state, gets the first 6.25 off the top. And I'll tell you in a minute how much all that generates locally. Then the county, back about 78, I remember, I was working on local issues all along, but they traded, or they said they were trading, some property tax for a 1/2 cent sales tax. Only within about less than 2 years, it had all gotten forgotten and put into things. And until we started building the jail, actually the sales tax generated more money for the county than property tax. Now it's much, much more than that, as taxes have gone up and up and up on the county side, but that's another 1/2 cent. So that leaves 1.5 pennies, and guess who gets it? The city. A penny of it goes into everything. The other half, I guess I'm at that point. I'm trying to stay on track, but basically, I won't get into the economic development for a few minutes, but just keep in mind, the 1/2 cent here was not on there until I guess I can skip around. Alan's not watching.
Just get you the 3/8 and an 1/8.
I will. That's where I'm heading. Until 1987, in our state constitution, it was strictly forbidden to give any public money to anything private unless you were hiring them to repair or build something. And our legislature at that time, in their infinite wisdom and probably being trained by Texas Municipal League, decided to put this innocuous sounding little constitutional amendment on our ballot that said cities and counties can promote economic growth. Well, who could be against that? So it passed overwhelmingly. Didn't mention taxes, of course, but the 1/2 cent came out of that part, available on a local option basis for people to vote on. Well, we were a little behind. Generally, we're not the first to jump into things. So by the time it comes to us, we've built up some data to use to try to stop it. But the 1/2 cent was out there, and they wanted it really, really bad. And before I get into all of that, I'll tell you, currently, for each, well, let's see, each 1/8 cent currently, and it went up a lot last year. Y'all are spending way too much money and giving them way too much. Anyway, it is currently $5.6 million per 1/8 cent. Who would have guessed? It sounds like just nothing, 1/8 of a cent. But, yes, Kathy?
Are you saying that with our sales tax in the city of Lubbock, the penny and a half that the city collects from every dollar, that 1/3 of that goes to economic development?
No.
Okay.
I'll finish in just a second. In the fall of, well, we had started the Spartan group, the taxpayers group, and really at the behest of Citizens Against Government Waste, and I was contacted to do a tea party in 1990. So when people were arguing over who started the tea party, I said, no, you're all wrong, I did. Really wasn't because I wanted to. In fact, when they called me, they said, just go to your Chamber of Commerce. They'll be happy to help you and furnish a microphone and a place to meet and probably put out the word to everybody for you. I said, I don't think you know my Chamber of Commerce. I had dropped out of it by then. And so anyway, I thought, well, I'll just prove them wrong so I can call them back and tell them never mind. I called John Logan, who was the head. I try not to talk about people that are still alive, but he's not, so I can talk about him. And he said, Michael, we would never work against higher taxes. We benefit too much from them. And I said, okay, thank you very much. Of course, at that time, the Board of City Development was still funding them. And the Board of City Development had been in our charter since 1925 or something. So keep that in mind in a minute. So anyway, when about a year later, in October of 91, our city had called for a 1/2-cent sales tax with 3/8 of it going to economic development and 1/8 for property tax reduction, all on one piece of the ballot. And I carry around that old ballot all the time because it's real important. The second item on there was to repeal the entire chapter in the charter considering the Board of City Development and the 3-cent appropriation that had supported it all these years over on this side. And,
Michael,
yes.
explain that a little bit more detail.
Okay.
An 1/8 and the 3/8 and then.
I'll get there in just a second.
Okay.
Hi, Carl. Come in. So anyway, this 1/2-cent was out there. So I called, and this is what I guess set me off on this lifelong sentence, hopefully by God, to right all these wrongs in the world, being Don Quixote that I am. But I called a fellow that I was paying with my tax dollars in Austin who worked for the comptroller's office, who I had gotten his name. He'd been out here and briefed the council. Well, those of you who know me know that I kind of get into the weeds and like to read actual words about what we're going to do and the parameters and how much money they could leverage the money into and how we could repeal it, because I was going to start working on that if we did pass it. And so he thought that I worked for the city. I didn't tell him I did. I was very nice. Just told him my name and said, I have some questions. I'm trying to get a copy of Article 5190.6. And because there's a Part A and there's a Part B, and I could get way off and Alan would come and haul me away. But anyway, he spent about 30 or 40 minutes telling me how to get my hands on that money. Don't let anybody form any opposition. That's the only time we have any problems is if the voters find out. And you can do anything with that money. You can pretty much call anything economic development. Particularly if you pass it under B, which was wide open. You could build Taj Mahals and arenas and stadiums and art centers and you name it. In Amarillo, they use quite a bit of it actually for street paving, which is fairly logical. But we have to do all these other sneaky ways of doing it because we won't let them have all the money. But anyway, so finally at the end he said, have I answered all your questions? And of course he hadn't answered any of my questions, but it was quite instructive. And I said, I think you have. He said, I guess you'll be at Texas Municipal League this weekend. And I said, I'm sure people from Lubbock will be there. And so he said, great. He says, we're going to have an in-depth workshop on how to get this past your voters before they know what hit them. Well, the next day I was out figuring out how to take out a pack and specific purpose committee, and every day in the paper and on TV I was arguing with former Mayor Peck McMahon. We even did side-by-side editorials the Sunday before the election. I mean, it was a real big deal because it was novel that little me would be fighting big old Goliath. So anyway, and there were articles that said, what if the unthinkable would happen if the public would turn down the sales tax part, even with this enticement of property tax reduction, and also repeal the BCD? We wouldn't have any money to play with. What would that be? And it's all written out in documents even worrying about it. Well, the unthinkable happened. And the little guys won pretty sizably. And most of you have my little one-page treatise that I did on the history. If you don't, go check your name if I don't have your email, and I'll send it to you. But on that one, the voters rejected the first part about the sales tax by 57.5%. But on Proposition 2, which was to do away with the 3-cent property tax, they voted it down by 84%. Yes?
Put your 3 cents over on the property side, please.
Okay, and I think this next year it's 3.7 million. Don't totally quote me, it's mostly in my head, but I have a lot of little boxes up there. So anyway, following that, we thought this is one big wonderful victory. We're going to get back to being normal and quit funneling money off into unaccountable places for the good old boys to play in. But instead of doing that, in the next summer, when, well, I am going to talk about people who are living, so I take it back. Mayor Langston's group came in. Our congressman, Randy Nagelbauer, was on the council that year, as was Ty Cook and Max Entz, and I guess Maggie Trejo and TJ Patterson. Maybe somebody I'm missing. Oh, yeah, somebody in 3, forgotten his name, pretty good guy. But anyway, they rolled that over into the budget. Just said, we're going to keep collecting the 3 cents. We don't care what the voters said, we have to do this. The world will come to a screeching halt. Where it has been, come January, 22 years. That's that part. What we turned down, we still had our whole half cent because we turned that down. In '93, they came up with a half-cent tax, the whole thing, to support the Defense Department Accounting Center. And a lot of us researched that a lot, talked to people who knew, and we weren't going to get it, but it was to bribe the federal government to bring an accounting center to Lubbock. And it was going to take the whole amount. Well, it was pitched so it would be, money galore for everybody. So it passed. We tried to get them to put it as a stipulation that it would be repealed or never gone into effect if we didn't get the accounting center. They refused to do that. Urban legend is that following that, out of the goodness of their hearts, the city council and the whole city government just willingly repeal that. We fought like crazy people to get, I think we needed about 12,000 some odd signatures, and we got, I think altogether about 14,000, but all but about, 2,000 maybe were collected by the Spartan group and Libertarian Party people, and Republican Party people who were helping Democrats, everybody that wanted to get rid of it. But in the 6 months before we could repeal it, which took a lot of effort, and there were people on the council out campaigning to keep it, by the way, and they changed the rules in the middle of it. So, but we finally did get it repealed by 80%, which meant that people would rather have their money in their pockets than in theirs. And one of the closest ones was in January of 1995, they proposed to build a multipurpose arena which would take 3/8 cents of it. This isn't the United Spirit Arena, but they carried around the ballot early voting boxes to all of the high school and tech basketball games. I mean, they did lots of wonderful schemes. But despite all that, in the Proposition 2, instead of tying it together like they had the first time, they allowed us an option on Proposition 2 to capture 1/8 of a cent for sales tax for property tax reduction, which looms pretty large now at 5.6 million per eighth. Currently, it wasn't near that back then. Well, we took option 2 and rejected option 1 on the arena. I said at the time, if Tech needs an arena, they'll build it and they'll probably get some private money to help them with it. And that's what happened. They started building on it another year or so out. But anyway, that one we passed by 57% to capture the 8 cent. In 98, this same, different group, I guess, led pretty much inside City Hall. They put up the 3/8 cent sales tax for economic development, what was left. See, we had already taken an 8. They put it up for a vote, and they spent upwards of $170,000, maybe $175,000. I've got those records at home. They didn't have the money, so they talked the Chamber of Commerce into paying off over $87,000 of that. No, it's about 83, maybe, thousand from their Lubbock Industrial Foundation account, which I had some real questions tax-wise on a foundation paying off political debt, but nevertheless, they did it. And we were outspent, that $175,000, and we might have spent $5,000. So we were hugely outspent on it, and still the voters rejected it by 63%. So this is why these people don't scare me much. However much they puff themselves up and pretend to be all and end all, voters, when they're given good, solid information, they'll vote their pocketbooks. So it rocked along. And in 2003, there was still the 3/8 out there. So at that time, Mayor McDougall and Tommy Gonzalez, who was the interim city manager, I'm not trying to get too much in the weeds, but they called me in and said, we're wanting to put this out there one more time, and we know better than to put it out there unless we've got you on board. I don't mean that conceited, but they were getting the idea about this was the 6th time that it had come up. So we kind of bargained back and forth and finally agreed that they would get an 1/8 for their economic development fund. I never agreed to stop fighting to get rid of this. I could send it in every year, just the same exact speech. And so that we would get 2/8 cent, the remaining 2/8, for property tax reduction. And so I said, okay, I'll get on board. And because I wanted it off the table. It's too easy to come up with grand schemes and catch people's imaginations, and away we go. So the voters agreed, and we passed it by 61%. That finished off this 1/2 cent. But the voters, through those 2 elections in 95 and 98, captured 3/8 cents of the sales tax that was out there. This year, and this was for property tax reduction, and I watch it real close because we learned with the county they weren't real honest about it. And so now the Central Appraisal District calculates what it is, and they run it through a little bit of a sausage machine to rake a little off. But basically in 2013-14, our property taxes are 13 cents less than they would have been had we not captured that much of it. If we had not done that and had given them the whole 1/2 cent at this amount, they would have had over $20 million to play with, probably 21 or 2. So by way of saying that, and I say a lot of things that are a lot more important than my silly comments, but I was quoted in the paper the other day as saying that on Thursday night when we were all commenting, by the way, it is so wonderful to have a whole group of people that speak for 2 hours down there. It's reaching the point that I think the mayor wants to have citizen comments at night and then they tend to their actual business the next morning, because it's driving, and I don't mean to cause them harm, but it's because the citizens have gotten so much more informed and so much more active and are going down there and lining up and saying their piece week after week after week. But I was quoted in the paper as saying, when the mayor had proposed this in at the work session a week before, I said if I had had pom-poms, I would have jumped up and done a little cheerleader cheer for him, because it had been like it was carved in stone. I never could find the stone, but it was just carved in stone. You don't even talk about the budget until you set aside that 3 cents for economic development. Well, he dared, because there had been so much increase in it, plus they were pulling in a couple of salaries, which added up to about $260,000. One of them is the assistant city manager, Quincy White's salary, and then his assistant, and he makes like $165 plus benefits. So anyway, that pulled in. And so actually, with the increase in the property tax generated, new growth and appraisal creep, it wasn't going to cost them anything at all. They would still generate or have more money in the market Lubbock side of this. There are slightly different uses that can be done with the 3 cents and the 8 cent that they have, but because the only way I would agree to that 8 cent was if we put it under Part A, which is much more limited in its scope, and I was trying to put as many shackles as possible on what could be done with it at the time. So because of that, they used the 3 cent property tax to do things that they couldn't do with the other part. And they transfer most of the market Lubbock money into Lita anyway. I think 2.8, it's all in the budget thing. But anyway, I didn't mean to get off on that story. But it was pretty instructive, because we're really going into a tug-of-war battle over this right now. And it's like the world will come to a halt if we don't do that. What I began to realize, and this kind of goes back a bit, I went back last weekend, kind of knowing I was doing this, but also for my own information, and pulled out, I had hard copies of all the budgets back to 92, 93. And what I began to realize, even more, and I knew it at the time, this also gets back up to the norm of what's going on now. But when they couldn't get the sales tax passed in 1998, they created a blue ribbon committee chaired by Barry Orr to find some way to generate somewhere out of our pockets, preferably without us knowing it. Their goal was to get $10 million a year for economic development. Well, in 98, 99, they created what they called the Community Investment Corporation, or I don't think it's called corporation, a fund anyway. They started grabbing out of water, sewer, solid waste. They didn't take anything out of stormwater until 2004-05, so we'll leave it out for the moment. And of course the electric company had money pulled out constantly. $1 million here, $500,000 here, facade improvement downtown, anything that they wanted to do, that was the go-to place for all this extra money. And they were trying to build it up. Well, along came Tyco. Did you see that in the news this week? Rolled out on the front page, Tyco gets incentive package, along with Scherer, who's also there for the third dip basically. Frito-Lay reneged on one, then Shira got one, and now Shira's back for some more. They're pretty minimal amounts, but I have to tell you the Tyco story because it came back up. I thought it was really old news, but I happen to have the year and the page and everything. They cooked up a scheme, and this was basically 012, basically, that Tyco says, well, we may have to leave Lubbock. And this is one of the reasons I call all this bribery and extortion, because I don't know any other more polite words for it. But anyway, they came and said, we may leave Lubbock. What can you do to help us? Well, there was a scheme cooked up. Of course, both of the people here did, so I might could mention them. Debbie Delahunty was at the city, and David Sharp, Marcia's brother, he was the head of Market Lubbock at the time. We hadn't created LEDA with the limitations. And they cooked up, along with Mark Earl, who was at the airport, to build Tyco a building on airport land. They got the FAA to agree to it based on that there was going to be some revenue stream going to the airport fund every year. But I haven't seen any yet. But anyway, they borrowed $10 million to build them this building, and for 10 years, and it just paid out about 2 years ago. So this really was under the radar screen. Nobody ever talked about it. Yes?
Michael, who borrowed the money?
Well, the city council had to approve it. At the time, I had an email that I wasn't supposed to have between the two principal parties that said, you go brief the Market Lubbock board and just tell them this much of this, and I'll brief the council meeting group, and we'll be off to the races. And everybody I would ask about it that was at City Hall, other than those two who didn't talk to me, said, we don't know anything, it's not our project, we don't know. But anyway, the city borrowed. This is how we begin this trend, and it was funded primarily, one of the big cash cows in town that doesn't have much debt on it, so they can pull out a lot of money, is out of solid waste. But they were pulling it out of all of the utilities to pay this community investment fund, which lasted until they got their 8-cent sales tax in '03. But I've gotten a little afield, but I thought that was sort of important, considering, I mean, I just almost went through the ceiling when they did this announcement. Every time there's any criticism of LEDA and Market Lubbock, you've got to expect they're going to roll out that Santa Claus is back in town and we're handing out this magnanimous money, never mind that it's straight out of your pockets, in order to bribe selective businesses who are always politically connected, and that's where the crony capitalism thing comes in that we rail at when it's in Washington, but we thoroughly act like it's normal and acceptable when it's local. And quite often, as we saw last year when the printers in town just rose up, when suddenly we were giving Copycraft a big incentive package, and they were basically going to be paid for hiring all of these new people who were being stolen from the other printers. Same thing happened with Beck Steel when they subsidized Desert Tanks. So what appears to be new jobs is just rearranging jobs, but they're forcing people who are competitors to not only lose their workforce and have to pay higher rate wages to keep them because of this new unlevel playing field, but they also are, basically helping subsidize it, which is just abhorrent. But the public doesn't know. They don't think about it. I bet if you went just out on the street, y'all are a pretty informed bunch, but if you went out on the street, they would say, oh, well, it must be a private corporation that's investing in these things and has, bukus of money. But that's not the case. So Also along in there, so that people don't think that I'm a racist bigot, I'll also start with talking that in 03-04, and funding started in 4-5, they came up with this bright idea of a gateway fund. And they borrowed money also on that. Go into lots of things. Gateway right now has, not a whole lot, 91 million is all they have borrowed. Yes.
Michael, do you need to touch on the TIF?
I will. I'll get there.
Okay.
I'm getting a little out of order, but I'm getting back to it. The Gateway Fund is funded 40% of the 5% franchise fees for not only the electric utility, which, by the way, when they went broke, didn't put anything in the first several years until 08-09, I think. But XL, Cox, then Suddenlink, Telecom, South Plains Electric, and Atmos are the primary sources. So they went up from 3 to 5 cents on the franchise fees in order to do this, so that they could take 40% of the 5% and put it into that. The first year in 4-5, they spent or had revenue of $4.4 million. And I haven't pulled up the last two, but by 11-12, it was up to just shy of $7 million in it. And it was used for good purposes, helps growth, but it was pretty much to help the developers open up a lot of Southwest Milwaukee is being paid for with the Gateway funds, as is North Slide, which is real convenient for me. But nevertheless, it's not that it's wicked, it's just that all of these things, the common denominator, again, is utilities. So the other thing that Alan just mentioned, I'll just touch on briefly, because we keep wondering, as much as we're growing, why our property taxes can't come down, because they keep promises we'll just get enough people doing into things that we'll have a bigger tax base and everything will be lower for everybody. But they came upon the idea, probably another bright idea from the state legislature, to start having tax increment financing districts, diverting basically property taxes for the life of the TIF back into the redeveloped area. And the first one that was done here in probably recent memory, but I don't think there had been any before that, was for North Overton. And you got to keep in mind, in 2002, that whole area was worth $27 million. This is basically Marcia Sharp now, but 4th Street to Broadway, University to Q. And it was only worth $27 million. Now, it is worth $379 million. And the life of it is until 2031, because we borrowed $40 million to put in all the infrastructure. But anything that increases the value on all of these, and it's up to you whether it's a good or bad thing. I'm just saying there's reasons why money is here, there, and yonder. So it doesn't pay out until 2031. And I know last year it was a little upside down, but even on that one, which is considered a huge success. But then in 2000, well, that was in 2002. Prior to that, they formed a central business district TIF, which is downtown. And in 2001, it was worth a total of $105 million. And it was supposed to expire in 20 years, but in 2009, they decided to extend it another 20 years so they could borrow some more money for that. And so now the downtown is not built up as fast as we had hoped, but the value,
That's incorrect. They extended it because they didn't get started with it.
well, whatever. Okay.
not whatever, I mean-
Yeah, I know Carl works on this, so,
I mean, that's the way it is. They didn't
Sure.
get started on it, they didn't use it, so they extended the life.
right. Well, anyway, there's now money borrowed there as well, but the total value, and correct me again, this is in the budget books, is about 191 million. Is that right?
I don't know, I haven't looked at the roll in a while.
Okay.
Also, it should be noted that it's a problem with the appraisers. This is a double-edged sword for a guy like me who owns real estate as well. But like the North Overton TIF should be worth about $700 million. You said it's on the tax rolls right now for how much?
It showed 379 in the budget book this year.
Yeah, and it's a funny thing with the appraisal district. I mean, we know for a fact, because we've sold property there, that the appraisals of those, the center and the suites, those big apartment complexes, are like hundreds of millions of dollars. But the appraisal district only has them on the rolls for, $5 million or something like that. So and they can go and they can argue, the revenue, why they bought it at a certain cap rate. It gets complicated and it shouldn't be.
Right.
But it's always interesting how that's done, and in some ways for us, it's good because we still own property over there. We don't want to pay that much property taxes.
Right.
But on the other hand, when you'd like to see it grow and work,
Sure.
it's not working really like it should.
And I didn't mean to get really bogged down in the numbers because all of that is somewhat debatable. I'm just going by what's in our 13-14 budget book. But the third one then does not have any debt against it. Market Lubbock actually paid off a little bit of debt that they had on the business part. But it's the third one, the Leda Business Park, which is Kent to Ursuline, I-27 to MLK. But what you need to keep, and it doesn't have an expiration date on it because there hasn't been debt that has to be paid off until a certain time. But in all of these areas, everything over the base amount, the property taxes are paid by whoever owns the property, but everything over the base amount is to be used back into that area for the life of the TIF. So if we had gold-plated everything in these three areas, at least in my lifetime, unless, let's see, the one that expires in 2040, I'd be 97. I may still be shaking my cane at him, but basically it's never going to benefit most of us as far as lowering the property taxes. But I've gotten off. But the other one that maybe Carl will agree with me on is the Northeast Lubbock CDC is a 501c3 corporation. When Mark came in as mayor, Mark McDougall, in 2002, he thought this would be a really good vehicle for a revolving fund, self-supporting, to update and get some things going in North and East Lubbock. The only little problem there is that the boundaries on it are everything north and east of 34th and University, which you don't consider Northeast Lubbock exactly. There's a map, I don't know, it's not big enough for you to look at, but if you want to think about it.
Just draw it on the board, Michael.
Well,
Put your university, put 34th, and point to
Okay.
the northeast.
okay, here we go. Okay, everything north and east. Now see, it doesn't include what you might think about North Lubbock being, which is Arnett Benson, but surprise,
Guadalupe.
I'm sorry,
And Guadalupe and Chapman.
right,
It doesn't include those?
yeah, well, yeah, it would include some of those, Jackson and all, but what's instructive is that right square in the middle of it is downtown Lubbock. So I don't know that was apparent at the time. It really didn't sound like that bad a deal. they were to receive $250,000 a year for 4 years, which was $1 million, which was reasonable enough. It's kind of a balancing act. I mean, lots of things, lots of tax money goes into Southwest Lubbock, so it was only reasonable. But what happened, well, that wasn't all their money. They got $1 million there. We had a bond election in '04, which was the first year it was being really implemented, that, about $1.5 million went into paying for the infrastructure on a little housing development, which also wasn't a bad idea, called King's Dominion. So we put $1.5 million into what developers normally would put. The land, and it's across from S.P.A.F.F High School, by the way. I've got everything on the floor here. I knew it was going to slide off eventually. Actually, that's the Northeast Lubbock. Oh, but I don't think I need it, but if it's necessary, I can refer to it. But they got a lot of federal grants, a lot of community development block grant money. But the King's Dominion area, which is directly across from S.P.A.F F High School, was donated. I think it's 20 some odd acres. I've seen 2 or 3 different numbers, and I don't know whether it was twice. The records are very, very scant on this little puppy. But anyway, we paid for that. So altogether, just what I can find, altogether we probably spent, counting federal money, probably close to $4 million or so. But a lot of it, even they will admit, that a lot of it went into high administrative cost, and that's sort of where they wound up. They have a self-appointed board. Most things have council-appointed boards, so there's some slight control mechanism. These non-governmental organizations are getting to be a bit of a problem, and when I get into talking about some of our options on what to do next, that's one of the areas that really needs to be addressed. But anyway, about '07, they came back and said, we're totally broke. We didn't have any money left to put back into this revolving thing. In the meantime, they had bought into 35% into Parkway Place Mall, a new little shopping center on Parkway, with Dollar General in a little separate building on the front. I think it was supposed to be a restaurant, but anyway, that's where Dollar General moved over to from a few blocks away. And then there's about, how many? Carl, you went out there with me. 8, 10. And I just heard from our new interim city manager that some medical things are going to go into the rest of that. But the day that Carl Tepper and I went out and took a look, there were no signs up that they were trying to sell more lots in King's Dominion. I've talked to builders who worked over there, and they said people just, we reached our saturation, but there's a whole second part that they want to develop. They've also done some credit counseling. I'm trying to be fair. But they had very poor and practically, well, all of the accounting records and budgets completely ended in '08. They came back about '07 and said, we're broke. And they said, here's you another $100,000, go away and don't ever come back because you wasted everything we gave you. So that was kind of the situation until February 28th this year. Former Mayor Langston came, and there was suddenly a windfall of sales tax mid-year, which always burns a hole in everybody's pocket and everybody's wanting to grab it. So they made a pitch. They needed $251,000 to hire a new director, new assistant, new this, new that, and open another office. And so I was just appalled, and I thought, well, if credit counseling is a good thing, I'll go check around with people. I'll try to find them some good alternatives for the things that were really good to do. But that wasn't acceptable. I went back finally and watched the PowerPoint presentation that was done. I have it on email if any of you want to see it. Has a lot of good details on it. But it was that $251,000 was to last through September 30th coming up. And but under the goals which you'd think would be stimulating East Lubbock, where it's all really been spent. There hasn't really been anything done in North Lubbock with any of it, as far as I can tell, other than maybe credit counseling. But it was to last until then. But under his goals, the first thing, and I quote, I won't quote it exactly since I've thrown all my papers in the floor, but it was to coordinate very closely with downtown redevelopment plans and Imagine Lubbock Together, which a lot of us have a problem with. I'd have to have another 2 hours to explain Imagine Lubbock, but in effect, that's where we are. I went down to look at their records. There are no records of any kind since '08, but in May 9th this year, you can go back and watch the council meeting, suddenly Victor and Floyd proposed to take 90% of all the mineral revenue coming into the city. It said all, but when it fleshed out, the city kept 10%, I think, so it wound up being 90%. Of all of the mineral revenue, which this year is $1.1 million. It sometimes has been lower, quite a bit, times it's higher. That's about as high as it's been. But there's likely to be a lot more activity coming across. And instead of it going into the general fund to be budgeted, prioritizing things, that's what I have a problem with all these little funds. It's not that they're not, some of them for good purposes, but they don't have a control mechanism and they don't have a real factor of where it goes. So I went down and started looking at the records, or the lack thereof. See, Carol's gone with me, Deanne's gone with me, several people at different times. And actually, we put it all in chronological order, at least. It was just a shambles. And I said, has nobody on the council asked about this? Because the council passed the resolution to divert all of this mineral interest into the future. Keep in mind, it could be millions and millions of dollars in the future. With 75% of it going into this corporation, which, by the way, in February of '08, formed a for-profit corporation to go with their not-for-profit corporation. Lead agent, David Langston. Several other folks are on it, and it may be perfectly wonderful. They're looking for private investors. Go for it. But there are no records. The council has had absolutely no interest at all in looking at it. The resolution May 9th passed 5-2 with Todd Klein and Karen Gibson being the skeptics. But it is in the 2013-14 budget. All there is a chart going from 0 to $675,000 for that. And there's a separate one is $225,000 for downtown redevelopment. And under neither one of those is there any budget or any plans of any kind. Just here's some money. And when you get something planned, come back and we'll authorize it, I guess. That's what they say they'll do. I have my doubts.
Michael, so is there an account, so is there a city account that the money's kept in? And how much is it if there is?
Well, for 2013-14, they're estimating that the whole thing would be, they're just going with their 2013-14 numbers because, 2012-13, because they haven't, it doesn't all come in until slightly later. So, but I guess my comment that I made on Thursday night is somewhat apropos here in that when they had that work session and were kind of raking John Osborne, he's the head of Market Lubbock and Leda, about little details in his budget, which it was rightful to do, and if we had lots of time I'd go into all of that. But they haven't asked a question of any kind about this. And so I guess it'll be in an account. They say there's not anything immediately planned, but it'll be there when people want to come and get it. So anyway, that's kind of where we are on that one. But I want you to keep in mind that because that includes the downtown area, there's no reason that that board can't change their focus. And it's one of these untouchable things because it's sort of PC. And of course, Floyd, I got out and worked really hard to get him elected. So I don't think I'm a racist pig, but he thinks I am. His district, by the way, now because of population shifts, has gone way further into central Lubbock. And I really think you need to take a look at these maps. They're available in what the, where did you get those the other day, Alan?
GIS office,
Okay.
they're free.
Anyway, I'm not going to draw a picture. But what you think about being Floyd's district is right over here. What it is now, it includes 119, which is out to 82nd. And Mike here? Yeah. And he's the precinct chairman there. 118, which is everything over to University, north of Kmart. And this is around the Garden Arts Center. And now it extends from 34th to 50th over to Flint Avenue. So we're not dealing with what we think as far as a district, but, and I'm not trying to pick on them, I know they think that.
Excuse me, what is that map exactly?
It's a city council district map. I can lay it out up here if you want to look at it. I've scribbled all over mine, but they are available. And it's actually online,
Yeah.
if you want to pull it up. These were just bigger. I had gotten this when they were trying to decide on the model that they were going to choose through redistricting last year. So I wrenched one out of, I guess, John Grace, one of the city attorneys. By the way, there's a lot of really good folks at the city, and a lot of them I've known for many years, and there's a element of trust, so it's not really that difficult normally for me to get information. Kind of back now to more current, and I won't spend much time on the Imagine Lubbock Together unless somebody wants to hang out and talk about it. But the Chamber of Commerce raised mostly private money. There was one, I think 50,000 came from Market Lubbock to go into it, and they're one of the sponsors, and John Osborne's on the committee, steering committee. But they all together, and I'm here again because it's mostly private, it's pretty much a secret. But what I've heard is maybe 800,000 or more that was spent on hiring this outside consultant named Gianni Longo, who is from New York City. We could do a salsa ad and say, New York City, are we needing him to come in and tell us how to live our lives here? But we started researching the good man and found lots of UN Agenda 21 kind of connections. And I'm not saying that the people who hired him knew, but they're dumb as dirt if they didn't check it out. He uses the Delphi technique to create a manufactured consensus. Several of us went to every meeting. A lot of my friends that are counted as assumed supporters in their less than 1% who participated in any way, online or otherwise, my name's on there, and I'm not really a supporter. But most of the people went and said, this is so silly, it's a waste of time, it's a flight of fantasy, because their mantra was, we are not talking about anything to do with what anything costs, think outside the box, what would you do if money was no object? And one of them, they even put up on a big PowerPoint presentation, don't think how, just dream what if. Now, who wouldn't love to do that is if we didn't have to pay for it? And every time I would say something like, do you know that we owe $1.6 billion on debt? They'd say, Michael, if people like you had been around when Lubbock started, we would have never had Texas Tech or a railroad, and we would have dried up and blown away, and we wouldn't have even had sidewalks and all this good stuff. So, but I am a little bit realistic. We've had several other parts and pieces of redesigning downtown Lubbock. About 5 or 6 years ago, We hired another consulting firm from Colorado called EDA to come in. I went to all those meetings as well. I'm kind of like a reporter sometimes on some of these things. And here again, there was no mention ever about money. But finally, I got a disc of it after the final presentation and all the pretty pictures and all the stuff. And on the EDA report on page 166, in about a size 4 font, was the chart on how much tax money they expected from us to pay for it. Never crossed anybody's lips. There hasn't been on Imagine Lubbock either. In fact, but coming out of it, because everybody said this is wonderful on the EDA report, we are following that plan. And it called for about $383 million of tax money, of $1 billion something that they wanted to spend. And that was assuming that there was going to be lots of private investors and lots of foundation money and lots of everything. But the minimum that the taxpayers were supposed to chip in was $383 million. Here again, I have. I'm sorry.
Yeah, what year?
Well, do you remember, Carl? The master developer was hired in 08.
Oh, the EDA plan?
Uh-huh. 7, I guess.
I think it was the one in my office, 2003, I want to say.
No, it wasn't that far back. 7, probably.
2007?
I think so. Because they, I'm sure it's on the
This
disc.
is before I got here.
Okay, then you can't comment on it. I've been here forever.
Well, I've read it.
There's people that would like for me to go away, but so far I'm not.
So
But
basically you're saying that would at least be 500 million now, assuming for.
probably, yeah. But there again, there was never any money mentioned. There's always the assumption that everybody has bought in. So we found out, actually kind of through the mayor, that the Imagine Lubbock group was going to make a presentation, final report to the City Council. It was scheduled for July 22nd, which turned out to be an emergency LP&L meeting to explain how they didn't charge us enough. Anyway, so we asked for equal time, and I give Burley and a lot of other folks a lot of credit on this. And we kept waiting to find out if we were going to be able to do our counter presentation. Didn't hear, and it was getting up to where it was going to be difficult for us to put together a, professional looking thing. And I called and they said, well, we don't know, the mayor canceled it. And I said, oh really, that's news to me. So I found out, I called Glenn, he was on vacation. He said when Imagine Lubbock found out that there was going to be a public comment period by the riffraff out here, that they said, we're not coming. We are not engaging in public debate. So that was off the books. And he said there wasn't any reason to have it if they weren't going to be there, because all it would be was Karen Gibson, who's on the steering committee of Imagine Lubbock, could have thanked them for all their wonderful work, but they wouldn't have been there to make a presentation, which I thought was fairly instructive. And how effective maybe we've been through these handouts and some other things. We handed out probably upwards of 1,500 or 2,000 on July 4th. But because the theme of the parade was Imagine Lubbock Together. But it wasn't much evidence of it there. So anyway, instead of that, now there is a 90-page report, which is online on their website, or you can, if you're privileged, you can get a disc of it. But they finally made their final report at the Market Center to an invitation-only luncheon, which I guess the chamber paid for. The problem was they asked the elected officials, and for the city council to be able to attend, it had to be called as a city council meeting, which meant that sorry people like us could go. The problem was they wouldn't let us in until the swells all finished their lunch, so we wouldn't give them indigestion. And then we got to sit over along the wall where nobody would have to see us. We were like homeless people coming in. But anyway, that's where we are. There's a 90-page report, very thin on details. Finally, I actually taped it, audio taped it. Finally, in about the last 3 or 4 minutes, there wasn't that much spent on it, but about that far in of an hour, Connie Horton, who's one of the co-chairs, said, well, there's just a few little tiny things to do with ways and means, I think is how she put it. And she says, we're going to have to count on our partners, our community partners, who they are assuming have bought in. County.
So who she's referring to? The 8 other independent school districts?
Yeah, all of the independent school districts in the county, the city primarily, and the county. Neither the county or the city has had a vote to be their partner, but they said all the way along, even at the cactus presentation, that basically they would hold their partners accountable to implement this. And somebody, well, some of you may know him, Jack Galloway, who's not really been that active, but he was part of the original AFIG Tea Party group here. He was at the back of the room and says, are you all elected? And basically, interpreting it, he was asking them who died and made you king.
Michael,
Yes,
can you reiterate to this group that we can rescind the resolution on the Northeast District? If we don't have them do that, the majority of that money could park itself right on downtown Lubbock
Right.
for Imagine Lubbock.
Right.
You use that money.
Oh.
Millions and millions to come. We don't know where the end
good point.
will be.
I'll get to it in just a second. I wanted to leave lots of time for questions, but as usual, I take up all the time and don't get through even. But
Not today.
anyway, since Liz spoke up, it's all Liz's fault. She and I both had been going to all of these meetings. We didn't know each other. She called me knowing that I was a Don Quixote type and says, this thing is all like you in Agenda 21. I said, well, I know all about Agenda 21. Brian and I served on lots, and Amanda, a lot of us have served on Resolutions Committee, and we're always very opposed to it. But I hadn't done the linkage. But Liz and Leo Padgett's son is in San Marcos, and they are wreaking havoc in that town through this same type of imagining thing. These same consultants, and he has another cohort in Florida who's absolutely wrecked Florida as well, that they sell the same plan over and over again and get paid handsomely to do so. And so that's kind of where we are. But in order to meet Liz, I said, why don't you meet me over at Red Zone Restaurant on 36th and Slide. I've got a couple of people I want you to meet. And I think Barley and who else came? Doug Carr maybe. It was about 4 of us. First part of December. And Liz and all of us had some concerns about smart meters as well, which we'll have to see what happens next week on that. We have been meeting every single Thursday since December. And I don't see any end in sight. I keep thinking I've never felt the need to meet weekly about things, but so much happens that we almost have to. And so anyway, there's all that going on. We have created a group called South Plains Advocates for Freedom. It's nonprofit. Somewhere in here is the mission statement. I don't know whether it's stuck in here or not. But anyway, it's to hold government accountable, follow constitutional and biblical principles. Not a crazy bunch of group. We've got, seem like more and more people coming and joining us. And I'm really not the leader. We've got some wonderful people. Everybody that seems to come brings passion and energy and a talent to research. Carol's one of our best researchers on smart meters. We have lots of folks like that.
You have a website too, right?
Yes, we do have a
South Plains
website.
Advocate for Freedom.
Yeah, South Plains Advocates for Freedom, and what's the other one? Well, I was talking about the other one on smart meters.
Lubbock against smart
Right.
meters and Texans against smart meters.
And
If you want to go nationwide, go to Deborah Tavares, stopthecrime.com.
right. And there's a lot of things on these Imagine plans as well, on things like Freedom Advocates, Tom DeWee, several others. Go ahead.
Okay, we're going to need to open it to some
I know.
questions, but first, would you go back and
No, I can't go back.
yes, to LP&L and get a little bit where you skimmed over the top about the transfers?
Oh, yeah.
Before we
let me-
do that, Michael, before we do that, why don't we take 5-10 minutes? I just asked, we've got the room till 1.
Okay.
So if anybody wants to stick around, there's no one after us, even after that. So we've got plenty of time, but let's take a 5-10 minute break.
Sounds good.
Finish up.
Yeah, all I was going to say was, we're always accused of being negative. I've always had this hanging over my head, and Burley even sent me some really good ideas on what we're for, which I would like to read when we come back. But they kept calling us the cave people, citizens against virtually everything. And so when David Miller was mayor and was going to do a visitor center, $7 million visitor center, which we didn't think was very good use of tax money, and he spouted off and said, there's nobody against this except those cave people. So I showed up at City Hall one morning in my cave girl outfit. And it says, cave people vote. It's 2 little bears, and it says, your cave or mine. And it was quite an interesting little experiment. So in effect, they kept nicknaming us all these tacky names. So I finally nicknamed the great and wondrous folks here who think they can run everything. I call them the Loot Group, which has a double meaning, but it stands for Leaders of Our Town. So we have a bit of a fun thing going as well sometimes. Let's take a break.
Michael's going to give her closing statements, and we're going to have questions, answers, and discussion.
Sounds wonderful. I didn't mean to take up so much time. I was just trying to give a lot of background. The one thing that I touched on it, but one of our concerns has been over the years, and I did say that it's been so easy for anything that was needing to be done that they didn't really care whether the public, or didn't really want the public to know about it. They tended to dip into the utilities, but what I think really happened, and I had kind of knew about it, for a long time we've paid a franchise fee out of our utilities as though we were an outside company, and a payment in lieu of property taxes. And at some point, even on the water bills, they started actually calculating the value of the assets of the water departments. So you got to keep in mind, once we finish the pipeline from Lake Allen Henry, the wastewater treatment, suddenly there's lots more property that would be taxed if they were a private group. Also, because from a water rate study by another razzle-dazzle outside consultant rate model, sort of like Razzle-Dazzle Joe Menchilli, that came in and told the LP&L how to maximize their profits. They came in 04. You got to keep in mind, one of my good buddies, Tommy Gonzalez, was not picked to be city manager in end of 03, I guess. And by 04-05, Lou Fox, who came here from San Antonio, was our city manager. He came with a lot of good socialist ideas from San Antonio as well. So, besides being not a very good person, might have been fun, but he wasn't a good city manager. They began to build in automatic increases every year in our water rates. 04-05 was the first year that they started transferring franchise fees and payment in lieu of property taxes out of the stormwater, which had been created way, way back because the federal government wanted us to measure the runoff. It became a whole lot more than that to build drainage, so there's quite a bit of debt even on that, which anybody wants to get into it, it's available, that breakdown. But instead of adjusting the city's take out of all this, by about 07, 08, I began to say, what in the heck is this in the budget? It was not showing up. It was, well, there was franchise, which didn't mean a heck of a lot. I knew we did a little of that. But see, I mentioned before the break that we went from 3 to 5% back about this same time frame in order to start the Gateway Fund and be able to take 40% of that. Every time there's a need, suddenly the rates go up and the take being pulled out goes up. So what in my opinion happened, and I doubt if it was lost on folks who like to maximize money, but as we had increases every year in our property tax, in the water rates and all, this percent, which is 6%, well, if you have time, I'll get back into weeds slightly. Don't want to do too much. On the LP&L side, there's a 5% franchise fee and a 1% pilot payment, no taxes fee. Of the 5% on the LP&L only, goes into the Gateway Fund along with all the private Excel, Suddenlink, all those I was talking about. I'll just call it GW.
Michael, 5% of what, revenue?
Yes, based on gross receipts. Thank you for reminding me. It's based on gross receipts. On the water sides, this ought to be a course for incoming city council people before they go by for their lobotomies. Todd's one of the few that the lobotomy didn't completely take. But
Actually, Michael, if I may, since you referenced me, I'd actually...
no, you're not allowed. You're why they're meeting till midnight. It's not my fault. Go ahead.
You weren't supposed to do that. But now, I've been championing all of what you're talking about.
I know.
And I'm about to have to jet, but I will tell you guys, if y'all want to do something, contact any of your council members and say we got to end the transfer fee of 6% down to 5%. That's about $1.5 million. But if we don't do it this year, it ain't going to happen the next year. It won't happen the year after. But you recently had a political commitment that we would do it. If you want to do something tangible, push for the council to go for 5% across the board. The 6% increase in addition to the 5% is a way of garnering more taxes without appearing to do so.
Right.
Why don't we just take it down to 2% like Amarillo pays Excel?
Right.
You can make
Or
the
Excel
argument
pays
that-
Amarillo.
Well, excuse me, Excel
Be
pays
nice.
Amarillo 2%.
Anyway, keep in mind that the private companies pay 5% franchise fee.
That's right.
Okay, on the water side, it's calculated differently. On the water side, there's a 6% franchise fee, which is a percent more than private organizations. And this isn't just water, it's all of them. And then on them, they're calculating it based on what they consider assets. Particularly in the water area, it has gone through the roof. But anyway, there's a pilot fee, and it is based like on assets on this side. On this, it's based on gross receipts, if I don't fall down. Same thing, gross receipts also on that. So in effect, when they started raising the rates so much, there was no adjustment downward, and suddenly by about, well, there's a 5-year history on page 18, and you can pull the budget books. This is volume 1. I call it magic page 18 because it has all the transfers together. I began to ask about 7, 8, a couple of years before this. I said, this fund is sure getting big. What is it? It said COB. Andy Burcham was a really nice, honest guy. I texted him from the city, but he was the CFO. He said, oh, Michael, that stands for cost of business. And I said, and what does that mean? And he said, that is, he finally broke down and says, that's the transfers. It was never outlined in the budget books until I started having conniption fits about 6 years ago or so. Seems like it wasn't that long, but I think it was. Anyway, so in effect, by 2009-10, the total transfers, and this includes probably the cost, the percentage cost is probably also included in this. It's called indirect cost. It's the percentage out of each department to run the administration of the city. And they still charge LP&L even though they have a separate administration thing. It's a sore spot with them as well. But there are places I'm allies with them, quite frankly, but not many. But by 2009-10, the transfers, all the transfers out of things, basically all of these utilities, was 19.8. By 2010-11, it had gone to 24.7. Pretty good hike as we started to borrow more and more money. And the rates were going up, and this was all based on gross receipts. So by 2011-12, it had gone to 26.1. The year that we're currently in, it was 27.6. And if they don't adjust, which I think they're going to, because of the wonderful outcry from lots of you fine folks and a few hundred others that aren't here today, it was going up before that adjustment another $2 million, which would make it $29.8 million being transferred out of our utilities into the general fund. So that's become, when I had up the numbers earlier on property tax, I didn't really go into numbers or breakdown, but the sources of revenue are not only property tax and sales tax, which at $1.6 million per 8 cent, that's pretty hefty numbers too. The third source of revenue has become absolutely essential to the running of the world. We've grown government by the same amount, and so for the last 5 years, they've averaged in total revenues about $33 million more per year, each year, and that's still not enough. It's insatiable. I know their costs have gone up as well, but I haven't had that kind of an increase in my income. I doubt if any of you have either. So I don't want to completely confuse you. I'll leave that up in case you want to think about it. But the transfers are getting to be a huge part of this. Well, now when you say, can you cut a little bit off of this? They say, well, do you want your property taxes to go up 20 cents or something? Well, no, we want you to scrub your budgets and prioritize. And one of the interesting things, and I need to actually blow this up, and I mentioned it at the council meeting the other day, and I'll read it to them probably next week. I won't get into it, but you might want to look at it. It's dated 6/26/03, and it was when Tommy Gonzalez was interim city manager. And he put together, because they were at a real crisis. I haven't gone into all the dirty, rotten history of LP&L and some of my favorite folks who are still living. By the way, I have an open records request into WTMPA after following a major rabbit trail to San Antonio, and now it's back in Florida to find out what our fuel costs actually are. But anyway, he was prioritizing because we had to. I thought that was mine, but not only do people confuse me with Deanne, our ringtones are the same. But anyway, when he had to really prioritize for the only time that I can think of in a long time, he got down to core mission things, needs, and up here are wants. And one of the main ones that's up at this top of the wants is business development. Economic development is not the highest priority in the world when there's not much money. So I thought this was quite interesting and shows you again how history factors into things. But before I completely quit, because we've been accused of being negative, and I forgot, I don't think my mission statement of S.P.A.F.F. is in here. I would encourage any of you who want to come meet with us. I also left some paperwork out there. Some of us are looking very seriously at charter changes. I served on a charter committee in 1992 for months and months and months. It was never brought to a vote of the public. There was one in 2010, which I had some serious reservations in part of it, but it was never brought to a vote. So there's some real problems that we need to address to just generally get more citizen control, easier ways that we can override government overreach if need be. Actually, the whole thing needs to be rewritten, but without a willing council who would give a citizens committee real power to do something, it would take, instead of 5% of all of the registered voters, it would take 10% to rewrite the whole thing. But it is so archaic. How many of you take jitney cars where you go, or drive by an abattoir? There's all these things in our charter that don't exist anymore, and they've never been changed. So that's not the main point of what we're going to try to do. In fact, some of us that are on that charter committee, and we're going to open it up to more folks, but we're going to meet this afternoon. So it's going to be a long day. But Burley sent me some ideas because we are criticized all the time for being negative. And so I thought some of his ideas were quite good. And some of my dearest friends are my best advisors and critics, if you will. And because I'm accused of being negative all the time. And I'll just quote what he said were some ideas with his permission. Where is he? Okay, may I do that? He said, I am for ending the taking of money from the citizens of Lubbock without their approval and calling it fees instead of taxes. I am for transparency and openness in city government. I am for keeping city taxes low. I am for the city spending less money. I am for accountability in those groups that operate under the authority of the city, LEDA, North and East Lubbock Development, and so forth and so forth. I am for holding our city government and the city council members accountable, and I am for a responsible city government. Pretty simple things, and I thought that was excellent. Joy, thank you, Barbara. I hardly endorse all of it. Similarly, and I won't read it, but it was pretty cute, when we were all discussing all of the foibles of the Imagine Lubbock, Joy Sharp, who's not here this morning, I gave her some of the little dinky details, but she said, I imagine Lubbock with liberty and low taxes and debt-free and on, and it was an excellent thing. She got up and read it at a council meeting. So we are positive. We just know that you can't sustain just more and more money being diverted and not accounted for. So that's sort of where we are. In case you haven't, since you've stuck around, let me find it, I don't know what happened to it.
Hey, Michael, our tape's gonna run out.
Oh, I know it, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's all right, we can just go into questions.
No,
On this part.
there was a kind of a cool quote, and I don't know what happened to that piece of paper. It's in here somewhere. I had them all written down. But Churchill said that something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing, that every once in a while man stumbles on the truth and then politely picks himself up and walks away. So if you haven't done that yet, you're still here, that's a good sign. There are some actions that are being considered. Of course, some folks are just absolutely have to have some relief. These water bills are killing people. People are selling their furniture to pay the July bill. A lot of people think that it's going to go down. It's not. That first meeting on July 22nd was nothing more than the council, not the council, the Electric Utility Board and LP&L wringing their hands and figuring out how they were going to recoup the $3.2 million that they undercharged a bunch of us on our June bills. And if a lot of people erroneously think that that was put on our July bills, what was undercharged in June, that won't be charged until, you might not notice it as much, from October till we pay it off into the winter months. So don't get confused thinking anything's going to go down. But anyway, there's folks out here that are talking about possible recalls of part of the council who just ignore the public outcry on the utility charges, transfer fees, continue to want to raise taxes. There's a battle going on right now to whether to make the tax rate 49 cents or 50 point something. And I don't see the votes on the council right now to keep it from going up. And yet they have another $31.7 million in increased total revenue this year. Not just from property taxes, but there's plenty of money. It's just insatiable. And so I mentioned the charter really needs a complete rewrite, but it would take a lot of signatures to do that. There's also a lot of other things that are there.
Recall on 3 cents.
Right. And there is a way without going the charter route. In our charter, we have initiative and referendum. And that would be, it'd take about as many signatures. It's calculated a little differently. It would be about 5,000 signatures to put in a referendum. But I basically dared the council a few council meetings ago. I said, if you want to see what the public sentiment is about this 3-cent property tax continuing to go into this endless pot over at Lita, I dare you to put it on a ballot. Because I know over and over, we have never had a positive vote for standalone open-ended economic development. So I'm almost to the point, I thought it was a little out there when Carol first said it, but I've reached the point that I think Carol Meek's idea may be the best, restraining orders and exorcisms. But here again, I've shuffled my papers here, but Samuel Adams said an interesting thing at the Boston Tea Party, and here again, since I don't have it in front of me, I'll have to just summarize it a bit, is that, hey, magic. He said, it does not require a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen to set brush fires in people's minds. And I think that's an excellent thing. The other one I was going to quote was Thomas Jefferson in his first inaugural address, said, a wise and frugal government shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuit of industry and improvement, and then there's some gap in there, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. This is the sum of good government. So with that, I'd like for us to have a little discussion. If anybody is so inclined, or if there's something that you don't quite grasp, I'll try to dig out the paperwork on it or whatever else. Yes, Beatrice.
There are two views. Let me state it for those who are interested. There are two different views. Even I went to one of the mayor's morning sessions at Market Street, and he said the council and even himself and the office that he holds can do nothing about the rates that LP&L charges. He was telling all of us there adamantly that he has nothing to do with it. But then someone else said, in comment to Todd Klein, where there was a conversation going on with the people in his district, he said that this woman seemed to have been working with him previously and knew the insides of the workings of LP&L and how they were structured, and she said, you're lying to the people, you know that you have influence on this because you're the ones who do the rates, and he said, you have your own opinion about it. So.
Does anybody have, my whole charter package is out in the car, I didn't bring it in, does anybody have their charter with them?
No. It's out in my truck too.
Okay, well, basic,
So which is true?
okay, in 2003, 4, right in there, we did have one charter change, since the one where we repealed the 3-cent property tax. This was about the next one, and it was when LP&L was in such a mess, and it was basically put over into, separated out somewhat. The 2010 proposals on the charter were to separate it even more and have more autonomy and endless board renewals and all this. But it spells it out. I could go grab it if somebody wanted to talk a while. But in effect, what the council has control of, and this is off the top of my head, it's one of these little boxes way back here somewhere, is that what the council can do is control the rates, the budget, which is sizable, and they appoint the board, and they can remove the board, the electric utility board.
And may you add also in your notes that LP&L is the largest, well, LPL and water is the largest single cash bit in the whole entire budget.
Right. But what they can't do, and he might have, I'm not speaking for Glenn, he doesn't have a very good council to work with. Todd is one of the few that, sometimes he drives everybody crazy, interrupting and commenting on everything that comes up, but he has a good voting record. He's run away, but he's voted against higher taxes and fees, and he's one of them that we can count on. He was one of the 2 votes against not running this Northeast Lubbock thing through the, putting it through the budget instead of that other. And it's not about whether or not we do things in North and East Lubbock. That's not the problem. The problem is putting it into a corporation who has such a sketchy, non-existent records. Their accountants, I didn't go into that either, and I won't read it, but there was cover sheets that Carol happened to run across the other day when we were down there sorting their records, who nobody on the council seems to care to read. But the last few very sketchy financial reports had a cover letter on them from a reputable accountant saying, you're really, management, it says, meaning the board, self-appointed board, are not really disclosing any financial figures enough to follow any kind of normal accounting practices for us to determine an audit of any kind. So all we can do is just kind of add up what you've given us and assume they're correct. And that was the last few months and whatever of 08, and then everything stopped. And thus far, unless somebody has something in their hands down there, there are no records of anything since then, and yet we're fixing to devote a lot of money over there. But getting back to the LP&L issue.
Michael?
Yes.
Good question.
I'm sorry, Kathy.
Well, it's not a question, it's a statement, I guess. And this is regarding the LP&L. Actually, this is about the mineral rights that Floyd and Victor want for their own areas. I think that we ought to, as strongly as possible, go to our councilmen and say this is not a good idea. The thing, we are getting a windfall, but it will be there's going to be a finite amount of oil, which means that this will run for a finite amount of time. And what generally will happen is that you will get, or the City of Lubbock or whoever owns the land will get a huge check, which would be like a rental thing, and then they get a percentage of whatever oil or minerals that it produces.
Right.
That could initially be very high. There are a lot of factors that will affect the amount of money that's coming in, but the thing that we need to remember is that it's finite. We also need to remember that historically, anytime there has been a funding source that the City of Lubbock or anybody, and that includes us personally, has a tendency to put that in their budget, even though it may be a windfall.
Right, it's not a stable source,
Yeah.
in other words.
So if we
Right.
ask that not be given to any one district,
Right.
but go into a fund, it could easily build the generator that they are wanting. It could easily pay down debt, and it should be used for those things.
Right. Well, that,
Not building and maintenance or anything like that, but it should be for the entirety of Lubbock.
and that's pretty much what we're asking, is for it to go through a budgeting process. But at that same work session about a week ago, last Thursday, a week ago before that, Karen, I think maybe at the request of Glenn, said, why don't we take, they're trying to find some money to redo some buildings and, update some things, and said to keep it in that district still, why don't we take $381,000 of it and do the remodeling and updating on May Simmons Community Center, which should have thrilled Floyd Price. I thought the man was going to have a heart attack and die on the spot. He was so mad. He wanted it to go through that corporation. And then he wanted the other to come from somewhere else. And
Is he on
There needs to
the,
be accounting of that money.
is he on the payroll of that corporation or something?
There's no records.
there's no records.
There's no record.
Yeah.
But
It's 2008, there's no record.
if it's indicative, one of the pastors over there in his area got up Thursday night. He was the last speaker on the citizen comment part in this booming, wonderful preacher voice, and just had a fit about how they were disenfranchised and displaced and disoriented and you name it. And it was time that they got their share. And anybody that didn't want them to have it,
But it doesn't go to the quote unquote.
I know.
poor.
If it were going into infrastructure, there are some real needs. Chapel Hill hasn't ever had paving on some areas. That's not the problem. The problem is that whatever goes into that will be absorbed in administration for the most part. That's the track record. And I didn't mean to get off on that. By the way, a couple of dates, or three. First of all, no matter whether you're in District 6 or not, my beloved, I'm saying that sarcastically, City Council lady, who I've never had a conversation with yet, and she's been in there a year and a half, probably at her choice. Latrell Joy is having a town hall meeting, first one, Monday night at Groves Library on 19th, 5600 block, I guess, something like that, at 6 o'clock. If anybody can come, whether you're in that district or not.
You said this coming
Monday at 6.
Where is that, Michael?
At Groves Library on 19th, across from Lubbock Christian.
Okay, thank you.
And that's important because a lot of us went to Jim Girls and made some good points. And generally they film these and put them on City Magazine. So you can make some good points from time to time that do get out to a larger audience even than just the people there. By the way, Peggy Sue Rackham is here, who is of Buddy Holly's song fame. So she's one of my friends and actually lives in District 6. So
I'm glad you told me that.
you never know. Yes, Amanda.
Well, as I'm trying to, over the years, understand economics and understand, how the different types of economic systems work, I'm not, a lot of this, it's really confusing. And I don't work in a lot of numbers, I'm not an accountant.
I'm not either.
It's hard to go look through the stats.
People think I'm a math whiz, and I just know about where to find these things in budgets.
Well, I'm confused on
And they
how we
mean it for you to be confused.
Yeah, I'm confused on how we claim that we are in a free market system when, for economic development purposes, we pay private companies. I'm really confused on how we can still claim to be a free market.
You're not confused, we're not.
Answer your own question saying we're not.
And that's why I gave more background than I probably should have. But once we opened up that Pandora's box, and I can tell you their argument, I can argue my side and their side, and that is everybody else is doing it. And if we don't, and they stand up and bemoan the fact that we only gave them this teeny little 1/8 of a cent, everybody else gets a half cent.
So what is that fear that we're gonna be behind when it comes to other
Growth.
cities' growth? Like, what is that fear that
This has
we're,
been I'm born and raised here, and this has been the psychological downfall of Lubbock, Texas from day one. I still look at this as, this town is an overgrown farm town.
I think it's more of an inferiority
In
complex.
Lubbock, for example, you're gonna go do all this nice stuff in a semi-arid, almost desert.
Yeah, exactly.
All these ideas came from Oklahoma City.
Well, the Imagine Lubbock ones did.
They have 1 million people, they don't have 250,000. They've got a much larger tax base and things like that.
And they got lots and lots of federal money, which will be flowing in here
So
too.
there's many factors involved in this. I've never understood it, why we always have, and then like accuse Michael, the streets are gonna fold up and everything else.
Oh, yeah.
Haven't done it yet.
Well, and the whole deal, really, I think is sort of it goes back to the fall in the Garden of Eden, quite frankly, has to do with greed and envy and a lot of other things that these people are so jealous and want to be bigger and better than Dallas and somewhere. And I tell them, go move there. Carl's been in Austin. It's a nightmare, but it's what they want.
I just think it's interesting that we have people that believe in free market principles. I mean, there are Republicans within the chamber that believe in free market principles, yet they say we have to keep up
Right.
with the
This
growth.
lady right here had her arm up.
Yes, ma'am.
Casey, I don't know anything about government, so just let me tell you that right up front, okay? But is there any possible way to get a task force, an independent task force from citizens to do an audit on LP&L? Let's find out the figures, because nobody really knows the figures.
Well, as soon as I get my open records request filled, I first asked LP&L, all I was wanting were the actual fuel costs we're paying for, to Excel for fuel. And they sat on it for 10 days and then wrote me this nice little short curt note that said, we don't have any of that information here. You need to talk to the WTMPA attorney, who is John Davidson.
But Michael, my question is,
Okay.
can we form a task force? Can we get that done? Can we manage to do that within this government thing we have going on
Can I answer her?
here? Yeah.
Okay. This is things that are being looked at with the city charter. We're looking at that with a focus of opening up transparency. There's none.
Right.
Basically what we're talking about is we've got a bunch of NGOs, non-government organizations. Meaning all the boards in Lubbock are not elected. They're appointed.
None of them are.
Okay, now when you have all self-appointing, well then you've got the boys club, cronyism,
Right.
running wild. Then, going back to 1986, 87, when she mentioned earlier that the state changed its laws about bringing public and private money came together.
Public-private partnerships.
Public-private partnerships, which opened the floodgates. Let me remind you, since I'm in the oil and gas business, in 1986 was the downfall of prices. In December 1985, we were being paid $33 a barrel. February 1986, it was $8 a barrel. There were more poor people in this state that went bankrupt than the Railroad Commission could handle, other state agencies, the whole funding from all these 7.5% taxes on oil in the whole state fell. They had to open something up. The bottom line is, it's OPM. Other people's money. And that was your floodgates opened, and you're seeing the results. United Nations Agenda 21 just weaseled their way in right behind this, and with it, and brought their little agendas, which are going to be huge agendas. It's almost inconceivable. All we're trying to do is this community. This is as far as we can reach out. So we are addressing the transparencies, if you can do these audits, a total rewrite of the charter will be much tougher, we know that. A lot of stuff needs to just be thrown out, so new stuff needs put in there.
Well, it needs to be outlined on a few pages instead of all this Roman numerals and sections.
Non-government organizations. Oh, you think Market Lubbock would hate that? Leda would hate that? These boards, oh, you know, think, oh, we're crazy. Well, maybe that's where we at. Do we go ahead and just erase this whole thing and let's say, okay, now we can start all over?
Well, none of those are in the charter, by the way. They're just
I know,
created out of thin air.
But the point being is, this is what we're trying to summarize,
Right.
is that people have to understand only a small portion of what you are being taxed on, you voted on.
Very, very small. About a
10
tenth.
to 15%. Bottom line
Right.
is what you have voted on, and yet you were paying either through franchise fees, which is double taxation if you hadn't registered that yet.
Right.
Tax on yourself. You know, it's just rampant.
Right.
If the public wants to stand up, they can stop it. If they don't sit back and
Right.
or
And really what we're dealing with is not a huge group of people, but they have been running things since the Bill Wells tea room days. And their sons and grandsons now are in the same thing. And they're not bad people, but if you get a chance to do this public-private partnership and all you got to say is public money is tax money from everybody, is the funding side of it. The private part is the profit is taken out the other end. What a deal. I mean, you can't blame people for playing within the legal parameters that are out there. So until folks really wake up, and it's a little complicated, I wish a lot more people were here and maybe some more would. Now that I've got an outline that maybe I could follow it better the second time around.
now that we have a DVD for 2 hours of this, you can take it with, get a copy at some point in the future, take it with you and hand it to your family friends.
By the way, I want to thank Alan Davis. He put a lot of pressure on me and made me kind of crazy and forced me to make an outline pretty much. Bought a whiteboard, which we'll use for other things, and hired somebody to film this. I'm glad you're filming it as well.
We didn't want to limit you because we wanted you to really get your points out there, but I'm glad he was here to.
And I really hope I haven't confused everybody. I just wanted to kind of give you an overview. Local government has a whole lot more things. There's a lot of pages in that budget I don't understand. I just know where to go to find the key things that I track from year to year.
When does the South Plains?
Okay. Besides the Trailjoys meeting on Monday night, Tuesday, finally, thanks to Burley and other folks in our midst that have fought like crazy people to get citizen comments at the Electric Utility Board meeting for 30 minutes on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday at 1 o'clock. Then they'll go into executive session for an hour or so and come back and have their other thing. What's on the agenda right now is a big, big deal. It was tossed out and everybody just assumes, oh, we can breathe a sigh of relief on the smart meters. It was just tossed out. It wasn't on the agenda at the last Electric Utility Board meeting by Mark McDougall that, gee, we might delay getting into the smart meters at least for 60 days. But it's in there, $20 million of it is in their 13-14 proposed budget, which the council can take out. They can control that. What they can't control is this thing on generation, in which they're looking at several proposals. Here again, they'll say it's proprietary. You were asking Peggy Sue about the audit. The years are completely missing. There was lots of detail about the electric utility until about 2000. And we were in a competitive situation. From then on, there's a page in the budget books that says this is a competitive matter, and if you knew about it, we'd have to kill you, basically. So it's gone. There's nothing, there's no records in there. And finally, they started putting it back in about 11, 12, when we said, hey, you don't have competition anymore, what's the what's the darn deal? And anyway, the utility board meets. They're going to discuss, in fact, they're having vendors come in about the smart meters. And if you want to know a lot more about that, talk to Carol, Burley, Liz. A lot of folks know a lot more about that than I do. But there are, and on the back of the little handouts that we had, by the way, change that cover thing to 27 or 127 million before you give it to anybody else. By the way, the idea of history, I had a few of these. I actually have a whole bunch of them. But it shows that issues keep cropping up, the same things over and over. This was written by a congressman in 1984 named George Hanson, and it's called To Harass Our People, and it has a part on assault on religion. I have lots more of them. If anybody wants them, I have boxes of them. But it was about the IRS and government abuse of power. Lois Lerner, anybody? A few other folks? Never goes away. And this is why we're having a breakdown somewhat, and we feel like everything's out of control because the vast majority of the people do not have the time. They keep us working day and night to be able to pay for this government we didn't ask for. So we're out there without the time to pursue what I call these concentrated interests, who it's their very thing. They have lobbyists everywhere. And for those of us who have lots of other things going on, we actually have jobs sometimes and a few other things, kids going to school, all these things that happen, and our other activities. So because of that, there's a vacuum, and government loves to fill it. And they'll say, well, everybody's on board, I guess, because you're not saying anything. So if anybody wants the contact information, emails for the council, the electric utility board, anything else, just let me know and I will email it to you. And you can just click on it. I've transferred it over where you can actually just pick them up and put them in a list. You don't have to retype it. So that's a possibility. Any other question? Don, you had your hand up.
I did. Thank you for your great presentation, and thank you for your fighting out there. It's just great. Thomas Jefferson and a lot of his predecessors says if we're not active and continually active, the government will keep taking power away from us. And that's whether it be at the city level, the county level, the state level, the federal level, and that's why our founding fathers wisely put together the division of powers. I'm not in favor of government deciding winners and losers, including here in Lubbock. I've tried to start 5 businesses here in Lubbock. The first 3 I tried to start with Lita and other groups, and we were not coming asking for money, we weren't asking for land, we had all the money. They had all the background. One was with Mercedes-Benz distribution center, another was a development center, and I couldn't get anything out. They obviously didn't want us here. I bought friends in California, they literally chased them out the door. Now, this was 20 years ago. But we should not be picking winners or losers. I had the opportunity to put a distribution center here. The drivetrain for the ML Mercedes is made in Germany, shipped to the U.S. It's distributed out of Nashville. We could have had it here in Lubbock, Texas. They got their information in 36 hours. It took me over 3 months. So we need to get the cities, we need to get the government out of picking winners and losers. I've started 2 businesses since. We did not involve the city in either one of those. One is Selenium Technologies, which we developed drugs with Texas Tech. And we did not involve the city, but we need to get the city out, we need to get the state out of picking winners.
Well, and as a for instance, Lita has created there's another TIF for that central not central, there's 3 of them. Anyway, the Lita Business Park. And one of the questions that set everybody over there off was when they were trying to just set aside some money that they'd been paying on debt service on it into a capital projects thing. And they said, well, what's your plans for this? This was their windfall of money, which causes them not to lose any really off of last year. And they said, well, it's going to go into capital projects in case we run across a business that we want to give them land and they don't want to build in the business park. Now, this is who they choose to give money to and land and build buildings for, like Tyco, which was absolutely outrageous. But anyway, they said, well, we want to be able to go out and buy some land somewhere else in town to give to these people who need it. And they said, have you ever done this before? Well, no, but now that we have some money, we might do that. And so this is how it evolves, and the more money that's there. By the way, their administrative overhead, they're always throwing up Amarillo. Amarillo has, I think, has $17 million, which they use a lot of it for infrastructure. But I think they have, barely 9 employees to administer the 17 million. We have 15 or more. I'll have to file another open records request to get the actual.
I think it was less than that last year. I think it was only about 5 people.
Maybe so.
But they utilized the Chamber of Commerce to do that, which we do not do. At the same time, last year, we had...
Well, the Chamber of Commerce works constantly. It's just against us.
How many birds? 34?
34, as I recall, last year, Leda, counting Market Lubbock, 7 Lubbock, had a total of 34 people.
Well, that probably includes the Sports Authority. There's some shared things with it there as well. But the CEO, John Osborne, with his car allowances and his bonuses for giving away money, is $250,000. Our city manager that just stepped down was making $225,000 with no other perks. He's over a $9 million budget. If we don't, well, either way, he'll have about $9 million, counting the 8 cent plus 3 cents if it's not altered. And he's over a $9 million budget. The total city budget for everything is $671 million. General fund's not near that much. But it's not comparable. It's insane. And I think this fight can be taken to the public. Of course, we'll be outspent 40-1 because they're not going to give that puppy up. It's been too good. But at some point, it's going to become unbearable like all these things have, like the utility transfer thing. It's become a real issue now. And when you tell people who can't pay their bills and are having to try to finance it and being charged $30 if they talk to somebody down there, which they have delayed that for 60 days, but that's not going to help anybody's bills. And you tell them that a lot of that money is being skimmed off and not part of what they're even paying for, they get ready to go lynch people. And I'm not trying to incite riots, but unless people are informed about this, they're not going even sometimes to vote on council members. I'm not a huge fan of recall, but there are 3 folks on the council who are not up until 2016, and they're probably 3 of the less approachable, less on our side folks, which is districts 2, 4, and 6. The ones that are up and with the mayor are in 2014 are districts 1, 3, and 5. And you might want to look at the map before you leave if you...
Hey, Michael, how come you've never tried initiating a referendum over the Leda issue?
Well...
No one deleted the initiative.
I think we're at a point where there really is an important way of doing it. I'm not trying to have a revolution, but really until our South Plains Advocates of Freedom thing came along, even all those years that we had monthly meetings with Spartan, and they were mostly one of them was here today, Clyde Myers and Irene were here. They were part of my original group. And they were, Clyde is a World War II hero, big time. He came today. And, he's got to be 90, maybe, or more. And, but they were part of my original group. They were a lot more, they knew what they believed and when we needed to. We fought through all these battles. These were all referendums on the 6 sales tax elections, and people voted every time to take money for property tax reduction. amounting to 13 cents on our property tax rate. So I guess we've had referendums, but when we do, they haven't abided by them. When we voted out the 3-cent property tax by 84%.
Most people be in jail for that.
Well, that's possible.
And that's what you're saying, they have ignored it for 22 years.
Me 22 years in January. And,
Let's slipped it around and all this, and yet it's still there.
but,
People voted against it.
anyway, even if there were recalls, and of course I've sort of said, maybe a little tongue-in-cheek, when I ran for mayor in 1998, it was out of desperation. I tried to recruit people. So I'm not going to go out and recruit anybody myself because it wound up that they recruited me instead. And I was just desperate for somebody to keep Wendy Sitton from keeping her friends entertained 24/7 on my dime. When I finally made the decision, it was at a council meeting. I'm getting off track, but it's just funny. When they had an outside consultant in Fort Worth called Carter Burgess come in with this beautiful watercolor book of what the Canyon Lakes could look like. By the way, part of the 90-page Imagine Lubbock Dream Plans is to connect the Canyon Lakes to downtown Lubbock with a water feature. Okay, never mind. Anyway, so we had a referendum. See, people don't remember history. We had a referendum. We turned down a river walk. We don't want one.
We don't have the water for.
We don't have water. It even says in there this may be a problem.
Oh, there's plenty out there in Blackwater Draw.
Anyway, what I was going to say, they came back with this dreamy, beautiful plan, peekaboo shrubbery, watercolor pictures, all this stuff. And Max Ince was still on the council. This was late 97, early 98, and said, well, how much is this going to cost? Which they never talk about. They said, oh, if you could do it all right now, $95 million, something like that. Wendy says, I've just got one question. And I thought, is she finally going to ask something intelligent about money? No. She said, are you going to get it finished in my lifetime so I can ride a canoe from one end to the other? And I said, that's it. Somebody's got to challenge this woman. So anyway, but what I was going to say on these council things, most people who have the capability and the core beliefs like we do, when they try to run, they get painted as rolling up sidewalks. Or if they have any sense at all, they know better than to go in there. And if you don't have that kind of core beliefs and you stop by for your lobotomy, you're gone. I'm sorry, good people go in there. I thought Paul Bean would be excellent. He didn't vote for every crazy thing, but he didn't fight like I think I would. It would be kind of...
I think one thing that's happening now is that we see that everything starts locally. And there is such a government overreach that every federal dollar you take, you're going to pay the price. For every dollar we take, it's going to cost us about $3. So I think this is why people are more upset now that they don't get you.
The other dates to keep in mind. Sure, go ahead. The other dates to keep in mind this next week, if you have nothing better to do than do all these things constantly. On Thursday, we have our regular S.P.A.F.F. meeting at 3 o'clock at Red Zone on 36th and Slide. Everybody's welcome. We're not a membership group. We welcome anybody and everybody. One of the electric utility board people came for a couple of meetings and finally ran away, I think. But anyway, later that night is the second and the only other opportunity we have to comment on the city budget and the tax rate, which will include everything I've been talking about today. Starts at 6:15, be there at 6 to sign up. And you'll get a hearing on the tax rate, you get another hearing on the budget. That's a twofer again. And I'm not sure whether they're having an actual council meeting other than that, but they will have on the agenda to adopt the budget that night. And the tax rate will not be till September 10th. But this is where we can really have some impact. And if we don't, then we're having to resort to, these more drastic measures. But recall is fine, except you've got to have good people who are electable to replace these people. And it's one thing to throw the bums out, but it's another to get better, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
All right, folks, I would like to thank everybody for coming out. I would like to thank my co-organizer, Amanda Smith. If you did not, please put your email on our list back there. That way we can get in touch with you for our future workshops. Next month, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Donald May.